Susan Slusser of the Chronicle reporting that the Giants are, quote, in talks with Jorge Soler. Is he a good fit? The dude hit 36 home runs last year, but there are downsides.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Also coming up on 5 years hosting Locked On Giants. I can't believe it. It's flown by. Anyway, I forget where I was going with that. Check us out on YouTube. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out. Check us out there if you haven't already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And where we get started, yes, we have like a real live report by Susan Slusser of the San Francisco Chronicle, who says that the Giants are, quote, in talks with Jorge Soler. Actually, let me just read you the full tweet that she put out. She said, quote, I'm hearing the Giants are in talks with Jorge Soler. He makes a lot of sense for them, given their lack of power, given the remaining free agents. This is one I think they need to get done to have more pop in the middle of the lineup, end quote. And so she's kind of spoken to this before, and we've discussed Susan Slusser's points, like when they didn't sign Rhys Hoskins about the power and that there were dwindling options for power. I'm kind of a different mindset that offense is offense. Like, it doesn't have to come in the form of home run power. Like, you know, I talk about weighted runs created plus, and if you're like 20% above average, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, doing it. I mean, it probably does matter it matters in certain circumstances, but on the whole, it's all about, like, there's a reason that metric is called runs created, because it doesn't matter how you create the runs on offense, whether it's by hitting the ball over the fence or by, you know, kind of getting on base a lot, because, you know, a guy like Soler might have a lower on base percentage, but just a higher kind of power output. But you can have the opposite, where you have a guy with a lower power output but a higher on base percentage, and it can actually lead to like an equal number of runs in theory. Okay, so that's kind of my thinking. But at the same time, I mean, come on, the Giants haven't had a player hit 30 home runs since 2004. It's either 3 or 4. Every other team in the league, every other team, all 29, have had either 3 or 4 30-homer seasons since 2004. And the Giants have had 0. They're the only team without 3 or 4. So certain they're the only team without 1. They're the only team without 2. They're the only team without 3 for sure, and possibly 4 of those as well. So, I mean, Soler hit 36 home runs last season. He hit 48 in 2019. 48 home runs, 162 games with the Royals. So there's the upside, right? The upside is that, I mean, you might be thinking, okay, perfect. And I think that a lot of fans, I have received a lot of questions about Jorge Soler in mailbag episodes, for example, asking, like, why don't they sign this guy? This guy's such a good fit. And my answer has always been the same, which is that, again, offense is offense, you know, and it doesn't have to come in the form of power. But also, the problem with Soler is defense. He doesn't play good defense. So, you know, if there was no DH in the National League, I would call it a non-starter. But there is a DH in the National League. And it just so happens that the Giants, you know, Jock Peterson is gone. And he was a platoon player, which forces you to roster an additional player, and it forces you sometimes to have him, you know, in bad matchups, etc. Whereas a guy looks like Soler, he while better in his career against left-handed pitching as a right-handed hitter, he is not like Jock Peterson in the sense that he's got these enormous splits that are like Jock Peterson in the sense where he's so below average against lefties that he kind of has to be taken out, especially in an important situation against the lefties. So for Soler, we're talking against lefties. Let's start with the real positive here. A 129 weighted runs created plus in his pretty long career to this point that started with the Cubs way back in 2014. And he has hit 248. I'm just going to compare actually one by one so we can see how this No. We'll just do versus lefties. Hit 248, 348 on base, 517 slugging, a 129 weighted runs created plus, which means about 29% above the league average offensive output. Now against right-handed pitching, it's not as good. 241 average. It's only 7 points worse than against lefties, but this is where the changes happen. On base percentage goes from 348 against lefties to 323 against righties, and slugging from 517 against lefties to 451 against righties. But it does come out to a 107 weighted runs created plus, meaning still above average offense when facing same-handed pitching. And so it's not a guy that you look at and say, yeah, he needs to be platooned. I think like certain matchups maybe, but the dude is dangerous. And I looked at one of the things I like to look at too with platoon splits is strikeout rates. Like, are you just striking out way too much against same-handed pitching? And for him, that's not the case. It's just the batting average on balls in play, which is not, especially in a 10-year career, it's not a luck thing. It's just about 10 points worse against right-handed pitching than against left-handed pitching. And just the power, like the ISO like slugging minus batting average is just a little bit worse against, or is it about the same? His walk rate is like 2 percentage points worse against righties than lefties. So, anyway, regardless, like offensively, is he a fit? Yeah, he's a good offensive player. Defensively, he doesn't play. I mean, he's got literally minus 55 career defensive runs saved, minus 24 outs above average, which didn't start tracking until 2016, a few years into his career. So he's clearly like a bad defender. I think he's got a pretty decent arm, but he's a DH. And so if the Giants were to sign him, I just never really viewed them as a team that wanted to sign a guy who is a pure DH. I guess we kind of did get that last year in the form of Jock Peterson for the second year. But in that first year, he was a outfielder, right? And that didn't go well because he was so bad defensively, and that cost them. Like him and all these other guys had bad defensive years a couple years ago, and it really hurt them. But with Soler, if they were to sign him, and again, in talks, we've got other quotes. Slusser reiterates in an article that she then wrote, she said, the Chronicle has learned that the team has had talks with the slugger, who hit 36 homers last year, led the AL in homers with 48 in 2019. The hot stove has slowed considerably in recent weeks. The Giants have had interest in third baseman Matt Chapman, starter Blake Snell, and outfielder Cody Bellinger, and all three remain on the market. So coming up in just a minute, we are going to explain the roster fit. If you were to sign Jorge Soler, how do the musical chairs kind of play out? What does it do to other players? What about Wilmer Flores and the great season he had last year? What does it mean for him if they were to sign this guy? So we'll get into all of that. And quotes from Buster Posey and Greg Johnson as they were like golfing at Pebble Beach about kind of the state of the Giants and their offseason. So all of that in just a minute. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our very good friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And an especially happy Super Bowl to you if you are a 49ers fan, because they find themselves in the Super Bowl, and it's very exciting. I'm very nervous. if you're like me, if the Niners aren't in it, the Super Bowl is all about best seat on the couch, favorite snacks, commercials, but then also placing some super bets. This year, it's going to be just ratcheted up from a 3 to like a 55 million. But FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a win or 2 or 3, and hopefully a Niners win on top of it all. You can bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, for example, which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, etc. Right now, the Niners are money line favorites at minus 130. Favorites on the spread at minus 2.5, and the over-under is set at 47.5 points. And if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, new customers who join today will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, as promised, we are going to discuss the kind of ramifications if the Giants were to sign Jorge Soler. I mean, just saying that they're in talks with him, I don't know exactly what that kind of means in terms of the likelihood of signing him. But the fact that, I don't know, I mean, I don't know how likely it is. There are other guys, like if you're in that market for like a pure DH, there are other options out there too. And so I would imagine, if they're considering Jorge Soler, they're probably considering JD Martinez and, guys like that. And so it does open up a whole segment of the market. The reason I have said he's not a fit for me, like if I'm thinking about it, was because I didn't think they wanted to kind of lock themselves into a DH. More so, teams use the designated hitter spot to kind of rotate guys through. But at the same time, if you can add impact offense, I can understand the appeal, whether it's Soler or anybody else, if they're just kind of hanging out in the DH spot. Like the Dodgers did all year with JD Martinez, worked out just fine for them. And Ohtani's going to just DH all the time now for them, and that's going to work out just fine for them. So, it's not like a horrible strategy. It's just that most teams, they don't have like a dedicated DH. It's something National League fans have to like learn a little bit because we haven't had it for very long. So it's kind of a new thing, but a lot of teams just rotate guys through it. It's not like there's just David Ortiz, hanging out in the DH spot every single day. So, by the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, the ramifications if the roster ramifications if the Giants were to sign Jorge Soler. So currently, if you go to like roster resource on Fangraphs, I think they have some things wrong. I like these guys, and it's a great resource for lack of a better word. I mean, it just is. But like they've got Elliot Ramos on the roster instead of Luis Matos, and I just don't see that. For example, Brett Wisely cracking the roster. I mean, that speaks to them not quite being, these are projected bench players, but still, it speaks to the fact that they've got some work to do. And if you add a Soler, it moves somebody out of the lineup to the bench, and then maybe you kick Brett Wisely off the Major League squad in this projected roster. But anyway, currently Wilmer Flores projects as like the primary DH. And, you could make an argument. This is a good example. Like Wilmer Flores had a 136 weighted runs created plus in 2023. Now, if you were a diehard fan and you watched every game, you saw Wilmer Flores made a difference. I mean, that guy had a great season for the Giants last year. Everybody went into a second half slump. He just carried the team, albeit not far enough, but still he went off and everybody else cooled off. And Soler had a 126 weighted runs created plus. Soler hit 36 homers, Flores hit 23. So that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's not all about, to me, it's like not at all about just looking at home run totals. It's like pretty to look at. Flores it's the first time in his career he's hit 20 even, and yet he was better. He's got a career 108 weighted runs created plus. I'm pretty sure that's better with the Giants. Yeah, it's 117 with the Giants. For Soler, he's got a career 112 weighted runs created plus. So that is not very different than Flores' 108. And frankly, Flores has played better defense, even though Flores has not been good defensively. Outside of first base, where he is actually pretty good defensively. So it kind of seems like unfair for Flores, because what it would do because they're both right-handed, and Flores would kind of become a platoon partner at first base with LaMonte Wade Jr. And I just think that it's a little bit unfair because Flores has hit right-handed pitching. I mean, he certainly hit right-handed pitching last season. He became an everyday player. I think this is an example, and Gabe Kapler's gone, so we don't have to hear the complaints about his specific managerial style anymore, unless we're just ruminating in the past. But Flores, in his Giants career, against right-handed pitching, 113 weighted runs created plus. So that's better than Soler's career numbers against righties. And again, both these hitters are righties. And for Flores, 124 weighted runs created plus as a Giant versus left-handed pitching. So these numbers are not far off from what we've seen from Wilmer Flores. So you kind of already have that designated hitter type in Wilmer Flores. But the thing is, maybe you don't already have that platoon partner with LaMonte Wade. And so the downside would be, to me, that you're taking out a guy capable of being an everyday player in Flores, and forcing him into a platoon role. But also there's the upside of when he's on the bench, like if Wade is starting and so is Soler or whatever, then you get to deploy Wilmer Flores strategically in an important situation against whoever, and whenever you want, if you got Wilmer Flores on the bench instead of, Brett Wisely or whatever, that is just a huge advantage. But at the same time, you're taking at bats away from Wilmer Flores if you were to sign a Jorge Soler. And so it would kind of, the lineup would kind of be like Jung-Hoo Lee, Thairo Estrada, LaMonte Wade. You'd probably put Jorge Soler fourth or something like that. And then Conforto, J.D. Davis currently projecting at third base, Mike Yastrzemski out there and right, and then Bailey and Luciano at the bottom. So it's not bad. There's no like real hole in that lineup, even with Flores instead of Soler. Like if you just switch them out and say Flores fourth, but at the same time, it's not a lineup that's going to strike fear, like real fear, into an opposing pitcher. The bench, though, again, they're projecting Tom Murphy, good backup catcher to me, that they signed this offseason. Probably means the end of Joey Bart. We're still waiting on that resolution. It could end up just as a simple DFA. Like that's how little trade value. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but he doesn't have a lot of trade value. Clearly, the Giants don't believe in him. They haven't given him real opportunities. So, but then Brett Wisely, I don't see him cracking the opening day roster because I think they're going to find somebody else who's better. Maybe you sign a Chapman and then it forces Davis to the bench instead of Wisely, for example. And then Elliot Ramos, I think Montos takes that spot instead. And then Austin Slater, of course, who is so good against left-handed pitching, platooning wherever. He could platoon with Conforto or Yastrzemski or Soler, for example. So that would be the roster ramification, basically taking away playing time from Flores, which I don't love, which is why I've said, it's not like the number one need. Like I'd rather they go out and get like Blake Snell. I think their starting rotation, which right now looks like Logan Webb, Kyle Harrison, Jordan Hicks, Keaton Wynn, Tristan Beck, like they've traded away DeSclafani and Stripling, and Alex Wood was a free agent and he's gone. Now these guys didn't perform, but at the same time, that is a very unproven rotation outside of Logan Webb. So I would much rather they go out and get, they do have Alex Cobb and Robbie Ray coming back eventually, but Ray is going to be after the All-Star break and maybe like well past the All-Star break. And Cobb is going to be, I think, at least a couple months. So you're talking about a significant chunk of the season where you're looking at a very unproven rotation at this moment in time. So for me, like go out and get Blake Snell, go out and trade for Willy Adames. Like I think these would be better moves than just signing Jorge Soler, in my opinion. But it also, I wouldn't complain. Like I think that he would improve the offense, certainly. There's no question about it. So coming up in just a minute, these comments by Buster Posey, who is a part owner on the board for the Giants, and Greg Johnson. They're kind of like, a power duo here. And they made some comments to the San Francisco Chronicle about the offseason and where things are as we're like just over a week from just over a week from pitchers and catchers reporting. I believe it's next Wednesday. And so it's kind of like the offseason's over, but there's so many players still out there. And so what did they have to say? We'll get into it momentarily. And before we do, all right, here we go. We are going to discuss these comments by Buster Posey and Greg Johnson as they were like golfing at Pebble Beach. I don't quite know what the event was, but there they were, and then they got talked to. Thankfully, the Chronicle sent somebody out there and got some comments by Posey and Greg Johnson, which is great. So thank you to the Chronicle for this content. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are back to 5 days a week, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already. So in the Chronicle, I don't have the author's name. It wasn't Susan Slusser, so I apologize. I don't have that pulled up. I don't have the link linked here. I just took the notes. Normally, I also copy the author's name, but that was a mistake, an omission on my part. So thank you to the author at the Chronicle. And what they said was, so do the Giants, I'm just taking snippets here. They wrote, so do the Giants have another move in them? And then quotes from Posey, who says, quote, I think it's feasible for sure. I don't want to speak like I'm the one making the decisions, but you just have to gauge the market and try to make a good decision. Those guys are great players. I'm going to end the quote there and pause and say I think the reference was to the top four guys, the Boris clients. We're talking Chapman, Snell, Bellinger, and Jordan Montgomery. So he says those guys are great players and anybody would love to have them. At the same time, Farhan has to make a decision not just for 2024, but 25, 6, 7 as well. And then I guess this was Susan Slusser, or maybe I just assumed it was Slusser and later found that it wasn't. But whoever the author was said, less than an hour after Posey walked off the number 18 green at Pebble, so did Giants chairman Greg Johnson. He didn't flinch when asked about his team making additional moves, given the players still available on the free agent market. Quote from Greg Johnson. He says, yes, there are a lot of good players still out there. There's definitely some people we're still very interested in. He continues, I think we're going to have to rely on some of our younger pitching. I think this was like later down in the article. So actually I'm going to wait on that quote. But yeah, to say there's a lot of good players still out there, it's just a fact. I've been preaching that all winter, is that people are like grading I'm seeing articles about offseason grades, and the Giants somewhere got like a C- and we're like 26th and blah, blah, blah. The offseason isn't over, and it won't be over even once spring training starts. It's just because of where we are in the calendar doesn't mean anything when there's all these players left out there. And I think there's still trades to happen. Like, I would not be surprised to see Willy Adames get traded, and the Giants are an extremely good fit for Willy Adames. And I think I've done an episode on that. If you want to check it out, I think the episode's called like the San Francisco Giants should sign or trade for Willy Adames, and I talked about, it's a whole episode on that. And so check that out if you haven't already. And there are plenty of other guys as well, and there's work to be done. This roster's not done. I wouldn't say it has like holes necessarily. I don't really like that word, and I don't think it really applies to the Giants. The Giants' problem is that they have competence all over the place, but stardom is very sparse. Like, you've got Camilo Duvall is a great closer, reliever, but relievers can only add so much value. They don't play that often. Logan Webb is an ace, and that's great. But you only have he's basically like your one, top tier type player, top 5, top 10 at his position. And there's a lot of starters, 5, whatever. The point is they need more impact. And so anyway, when there's impact out there, like Blake Snell is an impact starter. And I'm not opposed at all to going like the kind of the D-backs route and just like loading up on defense and pitching and just kind of trying to prevent runs and yeah, it's obviously you want to score runs as well, but as I have always said, a run prevented is equal to a run scored. Like, if you literally it doesn't make a difference whether you prevent one or you score one. Obviously, you need to score at least one to win a game, so there's that. But otherwise, preventing a run is this net same as scoring a run. So anyway, Johnson saying there's definitely some people we're still very interested in. I just don't think they're done. I think that they are going to make significant additions from here on out. And we've heard, when they've been done, they've kind of said, Farhan Zaidi last year, I just had this bad feeling when he said, we want the focus to be on the players we did sign, not the players we didn't sign. He was saying that at a certain point, and that just kind of signaled that they were basically done. But all the signals, like Posey saying it's feasible for sure, and stuff like that, and then Johnson saying there's definitely people we're still very interested in, they're not signaling that they're done, whereas in the past they have. So regarding the pitching, which I just kind of said was so unproven that it concerned me, Greg Johnson said, I think we're going to have to rely on some younger pitching. We think we have some credible arms people haven't really focused on, and we're going to give them a chance. That's pretty direct. We're going to give them a chance. He also says, I think it's going to be critical for these young guys to step up at the start of the season when you have Ray and Cobb out for a bit. And so that is more like, don't think about Blake Snell so much, and maybe when we're talking about we're very interested in some guys, we're talking about hitters or, position players / DHs. That's kind of how I read that. And he's right. I think that they do have a lot of credible arms that people haven't really focused on, and it goes beyond the names that I just mentioned. Carson Wisenhunt and Mason Black, all these, they have a lot of talented young pitching coming up, and they already have some talented young pitching like Tristan Beck and Keaton Wynn on the Major League roster. Kai-Wei Tang, you can throw him in there too. He got added to the 40-man over the offseason. So there you have it. I don't think they're done. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if it's going to be Soler, but I do expect more activity, and just know it's not just those 4 top free agents and then the trade market. There's just so many players who are unsigned right now. And so the Giants the supply is heavy, and I don't quite know what the demand is like throughout the sport because we haven't seen moves getting made. It's just been moving at a snail's pace, but the Giants have some needs. And I think because of the huge supply, they're going to end up with some guys, and they also have money to spend. So we'll wait and find out, and we'll give you updates tomorrow. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow we'll have the latest here. I mean, we're getting close to pitchers and catchers reporting, and so we're getting more kind of news on a regular basis, and we will have the latest for you. We're also going to put out a mailbag prompt just to have that in our back pocket. So just look out, back to 5 episodes a week. Every weekday we will be with you. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, and only if you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.